coming up on Tempered.
There is no problem greater than God. There's no problem that we can't overcome. If we both do what God says, if we are both willing to work through whatever problem. And it was not easy. And it does something very dark to the wife of a man who is addicted to pornography. And so while she was on the stand, my attorney cross-examined her and asked directly, at what point, how long have y'all been together? When did you start seeing each other? When did this become a sexual relationship? And she admitted outwardly in court that this was happening while we were still married. It was a very dark place. Mm-hmm. I had an eating disorder at that time. I just wanted to get smaller and smaller. And a part of me was like, if I just get small enough, I'll just disappear. I don't believe that it's ever God's will that a marriage end in divorce. I just can't in my heart think that is ever in his will. I also don't think that it's in God's will that a beautiful 37-year-old mom should be taken from this world by cancer. I don't think that God would will that. But I do believe that God works all things for good. And I do believe in providence. And in his providence, my broken and Kevin's broken were made whole again. I may not be able to say this.
Hello, and welcome to Tempered, a show where we will share the experiences of Christian women who have faced hardship and emerged stronger. I am Jenny Cochran, your host. Tempered can be defined as softened or moderated or seasoned to bring to a proper or desired state. In our show, we will deal with many topics that may affect Christian women in the 21st century, topics that can change us, temper us, bring us to a new place spiritually. Welcome to Tempered. I hope you will enjoy our show. We have with us today Monda Tackett from Chatsworth, Georgia. And we're going to share her story. We're going to talk about infidelity, the pain it caused, and the trial it was. And we're going to talk about being a single mother. So Monda, before we begin, tell us a little about yourself, your family, your life now.
Okay. I have been married to Kevin, my husband, for 19 years. We have 3 children between us. I am a registered nurse by trade, but I was fortunate enough to be able to retire last July.
Oh, great.
All of our children are grown and married, and we have 2 little grandsons. One is 8 months old, and the other is 15 months old. And my husband is the evangelist at Woodhaven Church of Christ in Chatsworth, and he's also one of the elders there.
Okay, that's great. Well, to begin, I think it would be good to look at some scriptures that relate to your story and to our topic today. I think it would be great to know God's view and the words straight from Jesus himself. So we're going to be reading from Matthew 19. We'll start with verses 3 through 6, if you'd like to share those and read those.
The Pharisees also came to him, testing him, and saying to him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason?" And he answered and said to them, "Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the 2 shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer 2, but one flesh. Therefore what God hath joined together, let not man separate.'"
So this is the words of Jesus himself, and he is saying God's plan. God's view. One man for one woman, and our goal is for life.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, we'll do 7, start with 7, and maybe read through 8.
They said to him, "Why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away?" And he said to them, "Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery."
Okay. So verse 7, when he says, why did Moses command to give a writing of divorcement? He is referring to Moses' instruction in Deuteronomy 24. The Israelite men were divorcing their wives for various reasons, and Moses needed to give them instruction on how to deal with that, if that wife was unclean, if she had been unfaithful. He wasn't condoning the divorce. He wasn't encouraging the divorce. He was just trying to show them how to deal with it and how to get through it. That's what Jesus references there. And then verse 9, he says some really hard words. The only reason we can divorce is if sexual immorality or fornication has taken place. And he says that the one who commits the adultery, if he marries again, commits adultery. These are hard words. The world doesn't want to accept these words. Societies and cultures do not want to accept these words. These are not my words. These are not your words.
No.
These are the words of Jesus Christ.
Right.
And he said so many times in Scripture, I do the will of my Father. So these are the words of Jesus, but they are the words of God Himself.
And they sound like hard words, but if we abide by this, life is so much more simple.
It is.
If we just do it the way the Lord Himself said. It's just, I think it makes things simpler because there's nothing more complicated than going through a divorce. There's just nothing.
So ideally, the situation, 2 Christians should be able to be married. They should be able to stay married and commit to that for their life. And that should be our goal.
Right.
One man for one woman for life.
Right. And to go into it with the attitude of, there is no problem greater than God. There's no problem that we can't overcome. If we both do what God says, if we are both willing to work through whatever problem. It requires stick-to-itness, you know. It requires a little bit of that. But a lot of people don't have that today. It's almost like we live in a disposable society. You know?
Do.
Yeah.
But you know, Monda, sometimes things don't work like we hope, like we want, like our deepest desire would be.
Right.
And so that brings heartache.
Yes.
And it brings pain, and it brings sadness and depression and all kinds of things into our heart and our mind and our lives.
Yes.
So let's start at the beginning. How did you and your first husband meet?
We met at David Lipscomb College. It was David Lipscomb College back then.
Okay.
This was in the early 80s. We started dating our sophomore year, the beginning of our sophomore year. And we actually got married in between our sophomore and junior year.
Okay.
In college.
So you were both Christians?
Yes, absolutely. My parents had been married for 60 years. His parents had been married for at least that. His father at that time was actually an elder in his congregation where they worshiped. I didn't see any negative or anything that I should be outwardly concerned about.
No red flags.
No red flags. No, and my friends didn't. You know, we had a very tight-knit group of friends and sweet mates and all that. And we did a lot of things together. It wasn't just always, courting with just, the two of us. We did a lot of group activities together. And so everything was fine, seemingly.
So the first years,
Great.
a number of years, were blissful and happy?
Yes, we both finished our college, and he was working, and I had worked a year as a registered nurse, and we had our first child was a son, and I was at home with him on maternity leave when I discovered a problem, and I was going through some things, getting ready to enroll him in some sort of daycare or whatever so I could go back to work, and getting to some legal things together that I needed. And in the filing cabinet, I discovered some pornographic literature, volumes of it.
Volumes of it.
Yes. So I confronted him, probably not in a Christ-like way. That afternoon when he came home, I had wallpapered the house and the floors and things with all of the images.
You were angry.
Oh, yeah. I was very angry. And I almost felt embarrassed. I know that sounds crazy, but I was almost embarrassed that they were laying there around. I was sitting there holding our new little premature baby, and all these things are around on the walls and the floors. But I wanted to make an impression. Yeah, an impression, yes. So we got over that. We worked past that. It continued through the years to raise its head, but I had come to the understanding that nobody's perfect. We all have our demons that we wrestle with. This was going to be the one that we had to contend with.
Mm-hmm. And work through.
Yeah, it was not fun, and it was not easy, and it does something very dark to the wife of a man who is addicted to pornography.
He just couldn't let it go.
Right.
He just couldn't. Did he get help with his addiction?
He did. Yes, he did seek counseling and was in counseling. There just seemed to be no accountability. Mm-hmm. It was. It got to where it was like, okay, well, it's almost expected. It's been several months, and so now it's time again. It just seemed to be a very cyclical kind of thing.
Okay.
We were always going through that. And I was very concerned because further into our marriage, 10 years into the marriage, we had another child, and this was a daughter. And by that time, he had access to pornography on the computer.
Oh.
And one particular time when I walked in, there was a big thing, young Russian girls on the screen. And we have a daughter. The computer did not remain in the house after that.
Okay.
That was like a no. That was a no rule at that point.
Did you come to a point where you began to realize, I can't live in this and the marriage can't be saved? Did you
I didn't. I actually was hoping for reconciliation up until the day that he actually remarried. I was hoping.
You wanted to hold on.
Yeah, I didn't want to break my children's family. I think you and I we talked about earlier. We share a love for Winford Claiborne, and he was my preacher growing up at Chatsworth, and until he moved when I was 12. I just knew that this was wrong, that divorce was wrong no matter what. I don't know, because I've never been in this situation, if there had been a blatant going outside of our marriage physically. I don't know if I would have continue to work for reconciliation, but I think I would. I would hope I would, because I think that's what God would want me to do. But I cannot judge that because that was not my situation. We did not find out confirmation of physical infidelity until we were in court one day, and he had brought her there to tell the judge how much I was tormenting him with asking him to pay his part of the parenting agreement or insurance bills and medical bills. And so while she was on the stand, my attorney cross-examined her and asked directly, at what point, how long have y'all been together? When did you start seeing each other? When did this become a sexual relationship? And she admitted outwardly in court that this was happening while we were still married. Oh. But he was already in that relationship with her, and he was not coming back. He wasn't. So,
and that's when you knew.
I did not. They were just seeing each other at that time, but I did not give up on it until the day that they married. And then I was like, well, because even after the marriage was dissolved, as Tennessee did at that time, they would not grant a divorce with the word adultery in it. So
the state of Tennessee
right.
divorce court would not do that.
Evidently, I don't know how they are today, but at that time they said they don't do that anymore. That's a non-factor, was what we were told. Oh. So if you want to stay married, stay married. If you want to get divorced, you get divorced. We don't care what the cause is. Nobody's at fault. If two people want to break up their marriage, there doesn't have to be a party named as at fault.
A guilty party,
yes.
Guilty of adultery.
And I really struggled with that because
sure.
I needed
because as a Christian
grounds. Yes.
And knowing the words of Christ himself, yes, that was important to you to have that in that divorce
Matthew 19 important, yes. Yes, I needed that. And
yes, I
really
get that.
struggled. I struggled with that. But fortunately, that day in the courtroom, I had so many of my church family there with me. We were attending at Central in Cleveland when we were married, and we had 3 of the best elders. They're all passed now, but they were so supportive, and so I wanted at least them to know. And then my children, like I said, I kept everything for my children to see from the courts, from the emails, so that should something happen to me and they can't ask me questions or should anyone else ever question things and want to know, then I have a non-biased documentation of things. But it's a crying shame that you can't have the reason for your divorce
the fact
anymore.
A truth, a fact. You can't have that in there. Right. That's so disappointing to me. I'm so sorry. It's
a disservice to. It's a disservice.
It is.
But that's the way that worked out.
So you had church family. You had friends that stood by you, encouraged you, showed up in court with you to hold your hand. So to speak.
And my parents. My dad was right there because I had told. My parents had talked to me, and I was like, "Listen, I very well may have to live the rest of my life single, and raise my children." Mm-hmm. But my dad was with me that day, and I always got violently sick when we had to go to court. Oh. But when my attorney asked her that question, all of my people were behind me, and I turned around and looked at my dad, and my dad just went like, "We got it. Okay. That's all we need."
That's all you needed.
So
wow.
I don't know what I would have done without my parents. I don't know what I would have done without our friends at church. I had so many ladies at church that would keep my children for me. One of our very best friends was the youth minister at Central, and he would pick the children up when I was working late, take them to church, drop them off after. Anything I needed. There were so many days I would come home and sometimes there would be groceries on my porch. Oh. And no name, nothing. I would get cards in the mail and it would say from someone who loves you, or from a sister who is praying for you, or whatever. There would be money in that card. Back then, I guess you could send stuff through the post office.
Yes.
And I wouldn't do that now. But I mean, there was constant care, constant compassion. I could not have had.
You were so blessed in that way.
Yes. And yet, I was so devastated by what had happened that I didn't want to go to worship. If I went and my children were not with me, everybody would give me that look of, oh, and some people would actually say, oh, they're with their dad. Yes, they're with their dad. I didn't leave them at home or in the car. I mean,
Because you had a custody arrangement.
Yeah, visitation.
Visitation, but he lived far away.
6 hours away.
6 hours away. So how did you manage that custody?
The judge, and even though he was the one that left and moved back to his home, his parents' home, the judge said that we had to meet him halfway. So it was a 3-hour, drive. And my little daughter, Bonnie, she was so car sick. And this was through the mountains. And bless her heart, she was just sick as a dog every time we had to go every other weekend for visitation. But I worked, deliberately scheduled myself to work on the weekends that they were with their dad.
But Monda, that was a 3-hour there and 3-hour back for you.
Yeah, and my dad always went with me.
Your dad always with me. And so when the weekend was over, that was another 3 hours there, 3 hours, another 6 hours.
Yes.
On a weekend. That was a lot.
Yes. Yeah, it was.
Of course, he had the same thing, but
but
he was the one that caused it.
And I know a lot of people who go through divorce and the father doesn't move out of state. They stay close so he can still be involved in their activities, their school functions and things. That was never
that didn't happen for you.
No. And, having to bear that part of the responsibility, and then the fact that he was not even paying his child support that he was supposed to pay. That's how we eventually, got him back in court.
Into court because he had, and he went a good while, not paying.
About 9 months, yes.
Not paying. So you got him back in court then.
We did, and he brought her.
And she showed up, and that's, okay. Well, you had a great support system.
I did.
That was such a blessing. I'm so glad.
Yes.
Well, single motherhood, being a mother and raising children is hard on all fronts.
Yes.
But as a single mother, so you took them every other weekend, but then you had them yourself as a single mother raising those 2 children.
Right. One of the hardest things was, working all day and then, getting their schoolwork at night. And sometimes they would come home with weekend projects that they would have to do.
Oh.
And if that were the weekend that they were supposed to go visit their dad, then Sunday evening was an all-nighter.
Oh,
because
wow.
This is the ironic part. He was a school teacher, and he would not help them with their homework. So he would wait, and then they would come home, and then they would cry and be all anxious. And, Mom, I've got to turn this in tomorrow. And, and I'm just like losing my mind. But, you would think that if you being the school teacher, you would want to be involved in that. But he wanted to be the fun parent. And that caused a lot of problems because the kids were like, we have more fun with Dad.
Sure.
Because you make us, take baths and do our homework and do chores and stuff like that.
I've heard that. That's a very common thing.
Yeah.
How many years, Monda, did this go?
From 2000 until 2006. Yes, I remarried in 2006. So 6 years.
Mm-hmm. How old were they when you remarried?
Bonnie was 7 or 8, and Alan was 13, I think. 13 or 14.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when did you start feeling ready to open yourself up for love again?
It took me a while because I had an anger issue and a severe distrust for men, even though some of my biggest support were godly men like my dad.
Mm-hmm. Elders?
Oh, yes, our 3 elders. I had, and my little couples friends I was telling you about, that the ladies would keep my children or pick them up or whatever. Their husbands, whenever he was going to be, sometimes he would come all the way here if he was going to do something with them in the area.
Okay.
And then in those situations, since my dad and I didn't have to drive, one of those ladies' husbands would just be at the pickup location at the same time so that I didn't have to be there alone. So I had...
That was so thoughtful.
Yes, I had all kinds of examples of wonderful men, but I wasn't dating those men.
Right. And for you personally, that wasn't replacing the trust you once had.
Right.
I get that.
Right, yeah. So I wasn't happy with men for a long time. I was not in a good place. I hated myself. I hated myself for what I couldn't give my children. I hated myself for what my children were going through, I felt, because of me, because of a choice in a spouse that I made. It was a very dark place. Mm-hmm. I had an eating disorder at that time. I just wanted to get smaller and smaller. And a part of me was like, if I just get small enough, I'll just disappear, and my kids will be better off. My parents won't have this shame, not thinking it was going to be so much of a worse shame, to leave them in a state like that. But I was so tired of fighting over everything with my ex-husband, and just felt like I had been betrayed by him, by God. I was in a terrible place, and I would love
to... You were in a very dark,
yes,
lonely
I would
place.
love to say that, I felt down and it was so low, but I always had hope, and I always had God, and I knew that God was there. I would love to be able for that to be my story, but it's not. I cannot speak about never losing sight of that faith, but I can speak about the providence of God, because look, you can never see providence
when you're going through it.
Never.
Yeah, it's always hindsight.
Always.
I get that.
Always. Because I look back, and all these people that we've been talking about, those people weren't just there coincidentally. Those people, God uses us to minister to each other. And God worked through every one of those people. And I look back today and just little bitty things. I see that while I was over here so wrapped up in myself, God was busy.
Working.
He was busy.
In your life.
And I see the fruit of all of their labor and his labor. And I thank God every day. I am a firm believer in the providence of God. He's not going to keep bad things from happening.
No.
He's not going to. that would be great. But that's not what we're promised. We're not promised that. As low as I got and as weak as I got, God was just waiting on me. And it's such a powerful thing to know that everybody, Christians always have the option when we fall, and we do. When we fall, all we have to do is come back. That's all we have to do. And he was there all the time when I should have known he was there. I was taught well. I was raised well. But when times got really hard, I just let that go. And I did things, I behaved in ways that I never, ever would have thought that I would.
But Monda, you were treading waters that you didn't want to be in.
No. Never thought I would be in. Never, ever
and
thought.
You were struggling, and you were trying to survive. Well, let's talk about how you met your current husband, your new husband.
Well, as I said, when my husband left, we had been living in Cleveland, Tennessee, and attending at the Central Congregation there. And there are so many friends and family that I have there. I love that congregation. And one of them was a special little widow lady named Nell Tipton. And she lived to be 100 years old. But she was, when my husband left, she swooped in just like a grandmother. And my children wanted for nothing. Anything they wanted, they knew they could get it from Nell. Bonnie called her my Nell, and so we always called her my Nell. I also had a very dear friend, Carla, that was at Central. And she was one of the moms. She had a son, my son's age, a year older. But we did a lot of things together with the youth group and things. And Carla was married. I didn't really know her husband because he was always working. And but I knew her parents. I knew her sisters. After I moved back to Georgia, my friend Carla had passed away. She lost her battle with cancer at 37 years young, and left her husband with a 13-year-old son
to raise.
But I couldn't really worry about that because I was down here worrying in my own my own soup down here. But that little widow lady, she kept just bothering me. You need to come up here. You know who you need to call? You need to call that Kevin Tackett. He looks so lonely. Oh. I pray about him. I worry about him. Why don't you call him? I have nothing to say to him. Why would I call him? So finally, to get her to hush, I called him, and he thought it was hilarious because he said, "You're not going to believe this. She has been working me."
Nagging him.
Yes. Call Monda. So we agreed to go out just to.
And what did she say about Monda to him?
That I was a great cook. That he really needed to call me and let me cook for him. And he would jokingly say, "Look at me. Do I look like I need more food? Food is not my problem." And he was in a dark place.
Lonely.
And she was the love of his life. He adored her.
Yes. And
to be so young, and to be widowed that young. But so we called Nell's bluff, and we went out. We were inseparable from that night on. We had 3 dates with just he and myself. The rest of them were all 5 of us.
With your two children and his Zachary.
Yes, yes. And they would come down and go with me sometimes, me and my children at Chatsworth, and we would drive up sometimes and attend at Central. So one time we were eating lunch after church, and Zack and Alan and Bonnie were on one side of the booth, and Kevin and I were on the other side. And Zack looks up from his food and he said, "When are we getting married?" And Kevin looks at me and says, yeah, when are we? I said, really? This is
This is how we're going to propose here? Oh, that's precious.
So Zack actually proposed, but
That is precious.
yeah. And so, but we talked about it, and we're like, listen, this is going to be on the hard luck plan. You know, Kevin had so many medical bills of Carla's,
Oh.
and I had so many bills from divorce and lawyer fees and court fees. And when we got married, we were putting we were trying to sell what we needed to sell, and they moved down to Chatsworth in the house that we lived in. But we were going through some things, and Kevin has so many things from Carla that he just can't
part
let
with.
go, right? And so we keep those things. So one of the things I found, she loved to journal, and it was so interesting to read through her journals.
Oh.
This precious things in there. I may not be able to say this. So I opened a journal, and Kevin was over here going through this box, and I was sitting in the floor going through this one, and I opened a journal, and it was a list of the people that she was going to pray for that day. She put that at the front of her journal entry every day, the people she was praying for. On this particular page, at the top of the page, it had the date, and then it had Monda and her kids. And to know that while she was dying, she was praying for us. That's a providential thing.
That is.
So my husband eventually signed away parental rights so
The children's father.
so that he would not have to be bothered or pay child support.
Oh, wow.
And Kevin adopted my 2 children. And then, and my children were so excited. We found some of Bonnie's old school notebooks the other day, and they had to write what they were going to do for Easter. And she was saying, well, we're going to Last to Leaders, but first, my mama is marrying Kevin, and I'm getting a new dad.
Oh, you found that in her? Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah. So, and
Those are
Zachary,
things you will keep in your heart.
yes, absolutely. So
wow.
there's just so many. There's so many little God winks. You know, this was in my plan, and I learned the hard way that God's will is not the same as providence. I don't believe that it's ever God's will that a marriage a marriage end in divorce. I just can't in my heart think that is ever in his will. I also don't think that it's in God's will that a beautiful 37-year-old mom should be taken from this world by cancer. I don't think that God would will that. But I do believe that God works all things for good. And I do believe in providence. And in his providence, my broken and Kevin's broken were made whole again. And I very much believe that was a providence.
Right. You have been tempered through this. I see in you through the heartache and the struggles and the pain and the tragedy of it all. You have come through and are very, very blessed.
Very blessed.
The Lord has taken care of you. What you went through was not his will, but he saw you and he saw your heart and he brought you through it. And he has tempered you. That's an amazing story. So it sounds to me like one of the biggest lessons you have learned through this is when you don't even realize it, God is watching over you and his providence. You look back now and you see his hand
everywhere
in all of this.
Yes, everywhere.
There are ladies in the same boat you are in who are struggling. What would your advice for them possibly to be with what they might be going through?
My first piece of advice would be for that lady and her children to be actively in counseling. Another providential thing was that the central congregation at that time was having Dr. Odell Denton come in and provide family counseling or marriage counseling, whatever. And my children and I both, all three of us had counseling with him. And I cannot tell you what we would have done without it or how we would have made it without that. One of the things I learned, which is my second piece of advice, I learned from Dr. Denton that my children had told him that they would stand outside my door of my room and they would hear me crying when I took a shower. And what I was doing, I thought, was shielding them from seeing me fall apart. But what ended up happening was they didn't feel free to grieve the loss of their father and the loss of our family because they didn't think that it was important to me. Mm-hmm. They never saw me cry about that. So Dr. Denton called me in after one of the two had finished and and he said, how are you holding up? Are you working through your emotions? And I said, yeah, I do that when I'm in the shower. It's just, for some reason, being in the shower makes it easier for me to cry. And he said, yeah, well.
About that.
Yeah. It was like, do you ever let the children see your feelings? And I said, well, I don't want to put that on them. Their life is hard enough. And he said, oh, they need to see. They need to see you. They need to see that you're human. They need to see that you loved him too and that you lost something too. Because evidently my daughter had told him when he said, how's your mom doing? She said, she's good. She cries in the shower, but she thinks we don't hear her.
How precious is that?
Yeah. So it's important to, of course, let them know that you're okay, but let them know that you're in this together. You and the children are going through this together. Not that you're this rock that is emotionless and is strong and hasn't shed a tear over any of this. Mm-hmm. And they're just, making too much of it. You can't make too much of it.
Those are wise words. That's wise advice.
Kevin and I talk about a lot. He still loves Carla. He still misses Carla. And we talk about sometimes we have decided that divorce is harder than a physical death. Because like he said, if Carla had not died, we would still be married. Mm-hmm. She did not leave me by choice. Of course, then he always says about her being in paradise, my wife left me for a better man. And she really did. But when someone leaves you and you have to watch them carry on with their lives without you, by choice, and choose another mate while you're still here, you're still willing, you're still living, you still want this. It is a living death.
It is. I see that. I see what you are saying.
And there's no end until that person dies.
It's still going on.
Yeah.
So you still deal with struggles within you?
Yes.
You're happily married to a really good man.
Yes.
But the pain of what you went through is still with you.
Oh, sure.
And it's going to stay with you.
Sure. And, there's always this, seed at the back of my mind, if it happened before, what if Kevin decides to leave?
Oh.
What if, and that's never going to happen. He's not a leaver. I wasn't a leaver. I was going to stick it out. I even told him I told my ex-husband when he left, I said, listen, we've got a spare bedroom above the garage. We can live separately together if that's what it takes. We can start all over if that's what it takes. But let's just don't cut this whole thing off. Let's just give each other the space we need, but let's don't make this a permanent thing. But when someone wants to leave, you can't make them stay. You cannot. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people that has happened to. There may not have even been, what we consider really big problems. The other person just becomes tired of the relationship or sick of it, and then here's this person just kind of left in limbo. So you're still dealing with pain.
And it sounds like Kevin is still dealing with pain of loss. But it looks to me like you have a good marriage.
Yes,
you're both very faithful people to each other, but to Christ himself.
Yeah, now we have someone to share our sorrows with, and we cry together. But when we were first married, I would wake up several nights because I could hear something, and it would be Kevin crying, because he had a dream about Carla. Or, I know for the longest time he kept her hairbrush. It still had some of her hair in it, and he had it in a Ziploc bag. Wow. But it's, I wish somehow that Carla could know. I don't know how paradise works.
I don't either.
But
Ecclesiastes does say those there don't know anything under the sun, or something like that.
Right.
So, but I think the humanness of us, we like to think.
We want it to be that way.
Maybe Jesus knows. Maybe Jesus will tell her and give her peace. But
I appreciate her so much because she trained Kevin well.
Oh,
he's a good man, and she was a wonderful person. Mm-hmm. She really was.
Well, Monda, if there are women listening who are in the stage of life where they're just now dating, they're looking for that special man, that future husband, do you have some advice you would give to them who are just in that stage of life?
I would talk a lot about unpleasant things, like, with technology, I think pornography is so much more prevalent now, easier access.
I think you're right.
Yeah, and easier confidentiality, anonymity. Nobody has to know what you're looking at. I think that is something that a young woman would need to ask directly. Do you have any urges, or do you have a history with pornography? Have you ever used pornography? I would say 9 times out of 10, the answer will be yes. And some people can overcome that. Again, pornography was not going to end up being the reason for our divorce. People struggle with different kinds of addictions, and that's, according to Christ, that's not a reason for divorce. We love that person through those things, and in spite of those things, just the way God loves us. But I think there needs to be a lot of interrogating questions. There was when I remarried, we had very open and honest
discussions.
About what we could tolerate, what we could not tolerate. He brought experience from his marriage, and I brought from mine. And unfortunately, we've not had to deal with any unpleasant things like that in our marriage. Most of ours has been, how do we parent? At one time, we had 2 teenage boys and an almost teenage girl in the house at the same time. So that was the biggest hurdle with that. But I would say there needs to be some serious sit down with a counselor. It's really important to have premarital counseling, which
Yes.
we did. You know, we were counseled by the minister who married us. But I don't remember those things being discussed.
Coming up.
Back then, you know, in the 80s, I married in 86. That really wasn't a subject. It wasn't something that was talked about a lot.
I think it was going on in
definitely.
secret.
Definitely.
But I think you're right. I don't think it was something that was talked about or known about, or
Right.
the vastness of pornography and the addiction to it was unknown at that time.
And now we have things so much worse than just pornography. You can actually arrange to meet people through technology, and there are evidently apps that you can go on and actually arrange a physical meeting, with someone. So
Yes.
there's just so many new vices that the devil has unleashed. And,
Yes.
and that's what he wants. He wants good Christian marriages. He wants them to fall, and he will pull out all the stops. And he delights in that.
He does.
Yeah.
He is a roaring lion walking around to see who he can devour. And we need to be aware of him
Yes.
in this world.
Never let your guard down.
Never let your guard down. You're absolutely right.
Yep.
That's good advice. Well, Monda, this has been great. And I hope that those who are struggling with similar things that you went through, that Kevin went through, when they hear this story, they will be inspired by it. And I hope it will help them turn to God and turn to God's Word to help them get through it. I hope this is an inspiration for them.
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
It's been a pleasure meeting you and talking with you. Yes. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story.
Sure. Thank you, Jeannie.
And I hope to see Kevin one of
yes.
these days. I hope our paths will
we will
cross
make it
and I will
happen.
meet him.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
When my tears are falling, I know God sees me there. My trial by fire, my desire is to rise above the fear.